There is a quiet enemy that enters even the most devout Catholic souls, often unnoticed, often disguised as virtue. This enemy is spiritual pride. Pope Leo XIV warns, "The devil is not troubled when you pray, confess, or serve, if in doing so you grow proud." Spiritual pride is not the pride of the world. It wears holy garments. It attends Mass, recites long prayers, gives generously, serves in ministries, but secretly begins to believe, "I am better than others. I am more faithful. I am holier." Saint Bernard of Clairvaux taught, "Pride is the mother of all heresies, but spiritual pride is the mother of all illusions." The danger of spiritual pride is precisely its disguise. The soul may continue to do many good works, but no longer out of pure love for God, rather to satisfy its own image of righteousness. It begins to compare itself to others, to judge the faults of weaker souls, to feel superior when others stumble. Pope Leo XIV warns, "The most dangerous pride is that which hides beneath the language of faith." The Pharisee in Christ's parable prayed, "God, I thank you that I am not like other men." Luke 18 verse 11. His words sounded pious, but his heart was far from God. The saints feared spiritual pride more than persecution. Saint Teresa of Avila constantly examined her intentions. Saint Teresa of Lisieux cried when praised, fearing that her soul might secretly take delight in the admiration of others. Pope Leo XIV teaches, "The closer a soul comes to God, the more it sees its nothingness." True holiness produces humility, a deep awareness that every grace, every victory, every virtue is a gift, not an achievement. The cure for spiritual pride begins with honest self-examination. Why do I serve? Why do I pray? Do I secretly seek admiration? Do I rejoice more in praise than in hidden sacrifice? The soul that admits its hidden pride has already begun to return to true humility. Spiritual pride thrives in comparison. The soul measures its worth by looking at others, either feeling superior or discouraged, both deadly traps for holiness. Pope Leo XIV teaches, "The one who compares himself to others walks not toward God, but in circles." The Pharisee boasted because others sinned more visibly than he did. The spiritually proud soul sees only external faults in others. At least I pray more than they do. At least I don't commit those sins. At least I serve the church faithfully. But God does not measure holiness by comparison. He looks at the heart. St. Paul writes, "When they measure themselves by one another, they are without understanding." 2 Corinthians 10 verse 12. The saints never compared themselves to weaker souls. They compared themselves only to Christ, and seeing his perfection they humbled themselves deeper. Saint Francis of Assisi considered himself the greatest sinner, though all praised him. Saint Dominic wept nightly over his unworthiness, though his life bore abundant fruit. Pope Leo XIV warns, "The more the soul sees its own defects, the less it judges others." Comparison also wounds the opposite way. Some souls despair because others seem holier. They see the fervor of saints and lose hope. But God does not call every soul to identical paths. He asks only for faithfulness to one's personal vocation. Saint Teresa of Lisieux rejoiced in her littleness, trusting God to sanctify her small sacrifices. Pope Leo XIV teaches, "Your judgment will not be, were you greater than others? But, were you faithful to the grace given you?" The soul that ceases to compare finally becomes free to love, serve, and grow, not for appearances but for God alone. When spiritual pride grows, another deadly seed takes root, the craving for recognition. The soul outwardly serves God but secretly hungers for admiration. Pope Leo XIV warns, "The soul that serves God for applause serves itself, not God." This temptation is ancient. Even among the apostles disputes arose, who is the greatest? Luke 22 verse 24. The desire to be seen as devout, wise, generous, or virtuous quietly poisons intentions. Christ warns, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before others to be seen by them." Matthew 6 verse 1. The saints fled human praise. Saint John Vianney wept when praised, fearing for his soul. Saint Philip Neri feigned foolishness to hide his holiness. Saint Therese rejoiced in her littleness, preferring to be unknown. Pope Leo XIV teaches, "Holiness shines brightest where no one is looking." Modern Catholics often fall into subtle vanity, seeking admiration for acts of charity, broadcasting spiritual practices, speaking often of their sacrifices, growing resentful when unrecognized. The devil delights when good works serve pride. For while external acts may continue, the heart grows hollow. Saint Teresa of Avila warned, Desire to be thought holy is one of the most dangerous temptations. The cure is hiddenness, quiet sacrifices, secret penances, silent prayers, offering all for God alone, content to be unseen by men, but seen fully by heaven. Pope Leo XIV calls, "Seek the eyes of God, not the applause of men. What men forget, God remembers eternally." The soul that desires only to please God becomes truly free, and truly holy. One of the most poisonous fruits of spiritual pride is the soul's temptation to judge others, not their actions but their hearts. Pope Leo XIV warns, "Only God sees the whole battle inside every soul. The proud soul sees only the surface. The spiritually proud quickly notice the faults of others. The mass attendee who seems distracted. The Catholic who struggles with public sin. The priest whose homily seems weak. The neighbor whose faith appears shallow. They whisper internally, 'If only they were as faithful as I am.' Yet Christ himself warns, 'Judge not, that you be not judged.' Matthew 7 verse 1. The saints feared judging others more than being judged themselves. Saint Philip Neri often said, 'There but for the grace of God go I.' Saint Francis of Assisi would serve public sinners with humility, calling himself worse. Saint Therese pleaded for mercy on those who failed, seeing in them her own weakness. Pope Leo XIV teaches, "The soul that sees its own misery has no time to condemn others." Judgment often masquerades as concern or defending truth, but it becomes sin when the heart grows cold, harsh, or superior toward the weak. True charity prays for sinners, weeps for their fall, sacrifices for their return. The saints corrected others only when called by duty, and even then with tears and trembling. Pope Leo XIV warns, "The judge forgets his own trial." Every soul will stand alone before God's perfect justice and perfect mercy. The cure for judgment is humility. To see oneself as the first in need of grace. To remember that secret battles rage within every person that no human eye can see. The soul that judges itself daily has no room left to judge others. As spiritual pride deepens, it breeds one of its deadliest children, self-righteousness, the belief that one's external faithfulness earns favor before God. Pope Leo XIV warns, "The soul that trusts in its own holiness forgets the one who makes it holy." Self-righteousness whispers, "I pray daily, I must be pleasing to God. I follow the rules, I deserve His blessing. I avoid mortal sin, I have no need to worry." Yet the saints wept even over their virtues, fearing that pride might have corrupted even their good works. St. Augustine confessed, "Even my best works are stained with sin, if not purified by your mercy." Christ warned of this illusion through the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, "God, I thank you that I am not like other men." Luke 18 verse 11. The tax collector, aware of his misery, beat his breast and cried, "Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner." And it was he who went home justified. Pope Leo XIV teaches, "Holiness is not the absence of sin, but the presence of humility." Self-righteousness blinds the soul to its constant need for grace. It forgets that even one venial sin outweighs all human virtue without the cross. It sees the sacraments as rewards rather than medicine. It believes it stands by its own strength. The saints feared this blindness deeply. Saint Therese of Lisieux offered all her works to God as fragile flowers, knowing their value came only from His mercy. Pope Leo XIV calls, "Cling to the cross alone. Say daily, 'Without you, Lord, I am nothing.' Then your soul will be safe." The self-righteous soul builds its house on sand. The humble soul builds upon Christ and shall never fall. When spiritual pride matures, it creates not true holiness but an image of holiness, a mask carefully maintained for others to admire, while the interior quietly withers. Pope Leo XIV warns, "The soul that cares more for its appearance before men than its standing before God has already begun to fall." This false image thrives in external practices. Long public prayers while private prayer is neglected. Exactness in liturgical details while charity is lacking. Harsh defense of doctrine while the heart grows cold toward sinners. Great care for personal piety while ignoring secret sins. Christ condemned this disease in the Pharisees. "Woe to you, you cleanse the outside of the cup, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness." Luke 11 verse 39. St. John of the Cross taught, "The soul that desires to appear holy is still ruled by self-love." Modern Catholics may unconsciously fall into this trap, posting pious words, seeking approval from spiritual communities, appearing devout in public while avoiding true self-examination. Pope Leo XIV teaches, True holiness grows deepest where no one sees but God. The saints fled the spotlight. Saint Philip Neri prayed, "Lord, hide me from the eyes of men." Saint Therese sought to be the little one unseen, content to be forgotten. Saint Francis of Assisi called himself a great sinner, though the world praised him. This false holiness is most dangerous because it deceives the soul itself, blinding it to its own need for mercy. Pope Leo XIV calls, "Do not ask, 'How do others see me?' Ask daily, 'Lord, how do you see my heart?'" The soul that renounces the appearance of holiness becomes finally ready for true sanctity, poor in spirit, utterly dependent on grace. The only force that can crush spiritual pride is humility, not weakness but holy poverty of spirit, where the soul sees itself clearly in the light of God's mercy. Pope Leo XIV teaches, "The deeper the soul bows, the higher God lifts it." True humility does not deny one's gifts. It simply acknowledges their source. Every breath, every virtue, every grace flows from God's hand alone. The humble soul never boasts in itself but only in His mercy. St. Paul declared, "What do you have that you did not receive?" 1 Corinthians 4 verse 7. The saints made humility their daily prayer. St. Francis called himself the worst of sinners. St. Therese rejoiced in her littleness, trusting in God's greatness. St. Teresa of Avila confessed her helplessness before every work. Pope Leo XIV warns, "Pride exalts self and suffocates grace. Humility empties self and draws down torrents of grace." Humility accepts correction with gratitude, embraces hiddenness without complaint, serves without recognition, and fears most of all to offend God even in small things. The humble soul does not measure its holiness by its own feelings but by its growing dependence on God. It trembles at its own weakness but rejoices in the infinite mercy offered each day. Pope Leo XIV calls, "Pray daily, 'Lord, show me who I am and who you are.'" This prayer crushes pride's head. True humility unlocks the floodgates of divine grace. It allows God to do in the soul what pride will forever resist. And from such souls, true saints are formed. The war against spiritual pride will continue until the last breath. But the soul that fights daily for true humility walks the narrow road to sainthood. Pope Leo XIV proclaims, "The saints are not those who appear holy, but those who refuse to stop repenting." In this age of appearances, God is raising up hidden saints, quiet souls who seek no praise, who serve in secret, who weep over their faults, who rest not in their works but in His mercy. Saint Therese of Lisieux, one of the Church's greatest doctors, called herself a little flower, desiring only to be unnoticed and forgotten by the world, while burning with love in God's sight. Pope Leo XIV warns, "Do not seek to be seen. Seek to be purified." The path is simple, though never easy. Frequent confession, not only for mortal sin but for every root of pride. Daily examination of conscience with brutal honesty. Prayers whispered in hidden places where no one hears but heaven. Quiet service, content to be forgotten by men. Radical gratitude for every grace, knowing all is unearned. The world honors strength, success, and visibility. But heaven crowns only one thing, fidelity and hidden humility. Pope Leo XIV calls every Catholic, "Begin today. Hide yourself in God. Let His gaze alone be enough, and you will rise higher than you dare dream." The proud seek to climb, and fall. The humble stoop low, and are lifted to the heights of eternal glory. Here begins true holiness, not in being admired, not in being praised, but in being nothing so that Christ may be everything.